Two of the Prairie's greatest veteran musicians have come together in an ambitious new project. Manitoba Skylines features composer, pianist, bandleader Glenn Buhr, and songwriter, poet, multi-instrumentalist Scott Nolan. Glenn has joined me in the Classic 107 studio this morning. Hello.
Hello.
Well, what a pleasure it is to have you here. I know you were at the old studio. Welcome to the new one.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So your partner in crime is missing this morning,
He's
but
missing.
so glad you could make it this morning.
Yeah, Scott's missing in action. He just kind of got off the road. He was on tour with some of this new music actually out in BC.
Oh, fantastic.
Scott goes on tour. He's one of these guys, he's sort of like Neil Young. He gets in a car and drives slowly, takes a lot of photographs and just enjoys it.
My wife and I did a road trip years ago, and it's just such a beautiful experience, just to take your time and to pause and to photograph and just see what is around you and enjoy that.
And then
that
even
time
better,
alone.
you know, in his instance, he's going with Corey Wolchuk, who's playing piano with him, and they just go from one town to another, and they get to see all the beautiful country and then play some music at night. You know, what could be better than that?
Oh, it's so poetic.
So anyway, they're just kind of they just found their way home, and we're starting to gear up for the show.
So you're no stranger to the Manitoba music scene, co-founder of the Winnipeg New Music Festival, former composer in residence with the WSO, friend of the MCO, and more. You've spent the last couple decades at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. How does it feel to return home to the Prairies?
It feels wonderful. I have actually been teaching at Wilfrid Laurier for 35 years, so it's more than a couple of decades. So even while I was working with the symphony in the 90s, I had an association with the universities, and I was really developing some new music initiatives, which was really exciting because the New Music Festival here in Winnipeg, when it was first begun, was the hottest ticket for new music in North America. So while that was happening, we were developing our program at Laurier too, and which got quite strong, not just in composing, you know, that's usually what new music is. Like here we are at a classical music station, and most of the music you play, probably all of it, has this system where there's a composer and then the performer, and they're separate. And so that's been important. That's a system that still exists, but it's sort of being added on with other ways of creating music. Like we present electronic music, and that evolved into sort of electronic dance music, which is its popular corner. And improvisation, you know, the jazz musician is the popular corner, but there's a lot of music being made through collective improvisation. And songwriting, which a lot of people don't associate as composition, but and I think the reason for that is that most songwriters are also singer-songwriters. They actually play their own music. It's true that Beethoven did play his own music, but as he got deafer and deafer, you know, he wasn't really sure what he was hearing. So it was always better if someone else was playing the music. So there's different reasons for doing these things, and I think in our current world, the younger generation accepts them all. It's really wonderful. We used to call it crossover. It's not crossover anymore. We're all there.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I think that speaks exactly to this project.
Exactly. Yeah.
That idea of taking these two we so often make a big deal of it. Exactly like you mentioned, we compartmentalize things, we categorize things. Do you think it's as big of a deal as we tend to make of it?
You know, I have to admit, when I kind of after I left the New Music Festival, I had a lot of commissions. I had about 4 or 5 years worth of commissions to finish up. And I was pretty much determined to start a new direction once that was finished. So I just went on moving. I looked at my certain talents. I wanted to do more performing. I was well known as a composer, and I felt my job was, frankly, sitting at a desk and working hard at being a creative musician, and then taking a bow in front of an audience once a year, which is wonderful. But I had a need for more. I'm an improvisational musician, so I toured as a jazz musician for about 10 years after that. And then the music that I was working on sort of morphed into something that was more influenced by more what I would call roots music, like music that comes out of maybe the American South, like the blues and the country music. And that marriage of blues and country music, you know, you just can't deny it. That's where rock and roll came from.
It's so
So
true,
I had never really explored that music except as a sort of a voyeur from the side. And now I was a player that I actually could perform all the music, so I studied it deeply and started my own rock band.
Yeah, the Button Factory Band.
It's called the Button Factory Band, and so The Button Factory Band isn't here this week, but we are performing a lot of the music from our new album, which combines the Button Factory Band with the Penderecki String Quartet, with other improvisational musicians. But it's still all my compositions. I just happen to be the main performer and band leader there. So that's the kind of direction I took. And because I'm lucky, I get to do that, and I get to get the attention because people know who I am. But I also am still working on commission, doing concert pieces. The current work is a cello concerto for R.E.O. Barnes, which will be premiered here in Manitoba.
Right, yeah, with MCO.
With the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, yeah. So they've been our lovely partner in the last few years.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah. Some pretty
well,
stellar
they're a partner in this one too. We have an orchestra in our show.
The Fallen Angels Orchestra.
It's called the Fallen Angels Orchestra, and that's just my pet name for the orchestra. But really, they're members of the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra. They have been partnering with us from the beginning on this project, and we couldn't hire the larger version of the orchestra. This is a 12-piece version of the orchestra, using the color instruments, the winds and brass, along with the strings and a percussionist. And then, of course, there's Scott and me and our background singers, and Corey, who will be on piano for some of it, to create this kind of super band. And we've spent a lot of time on this. I've finished my album. Scott is in the middle of his. We made a recording with the Penderecki String Quartet of several of his songs. I think we're going to hear one of those today. And we were so happy with the result that I started working on a few more of his songs. This is how this actually happened. He sent me a sort of a scrub recording of this beautiful song of his called Yellow Lights of Moray. His music is really all set right here in Winnipeg. And so the Yellow Lights on Moray Street. And I loved the song so much. It was this very charming, kind of humorous thing. It even had a solo, a whistler, someone whistling in the middle as a solo, which I transcribed. We're going to hear that on piccolo at our show on next Thursday. And there was a little trombone line, and I thought, and it was so cool. It just a little glissando on the trombone, every downbeat in one section. And when that came in, it just made me smile every single time. And I could not do this arrangement without that. So we moved from strings, and we added a trombone, and then we added a piccolo to replace the whistler, and it turned into this sort of chamber orchestra.
Yeah, 12 players.
And there I am at the desk again, writing music for in and around his songs and my songs. So in our show, the first half will be kind of my new music, which he'll be playing for me. He'll be playing with me as part of my band. And then the second act will be his work, where I'll be leading the orchestra and playing piano for him.
So before we get further into the show, can we talk about how this all started? As the press release notes, these seemingly apples to oranges artists, like you've mentioned, I mean, not as different as we tend to make it. But how did you and Scott come to know each other, and what brought you together for this collaboration?
Well, it's the kind of weirdest thing in my life. Like I was mentoring some student composers just last night, actually, in Kitchener-Waterloo. And when it was over, I had to admit to them, I just listened to 12 new works, and I had listened to them. This is actually exhausting because I have to listen so carefully. And I've been doing this for 35 years that every time I hear a piece of music, there's this analysis that goes on. It's all critical thinking, So, and because everything's a different style, you can't tell a student whether you like their music or don't like it. That's not relevant. What's relevant is what's there. So every time I hear a piece of music, I'm always thinking, where's the core of it? So I've heard Scott's music a few years ago. Well, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've kind of been following him just on social media as he goes through his tours. Every time he comes up with something new, I'd listen to it. So I phoned him, because I really respect his music. I feel it's as strong as anything that's written. It's just in this certain style. Like, for example, he rarely uses more than 3 or 4 chords in any one song. Whereas Brahms, that guy, thousands of different chords.
Yeah, went on a bit of a journey.
But I'm not sure that matters, We learned that when the minimalists rose in the 60s and 70s, that there was so much change in the work of like atonal music. There was a change every beat, really. Every note was different key and all that there was a reaction to that. And in other words, and then the punk rock revolution after all of those progressive rock bands, that was actually a reaction of the working class. You don't have to be rich and have had music lessons to be an artist. That's really the lesson. And I think Scott teaches us that lesson. He's an illiterate musician. He can't read music. He doesn't read chord charts. He doesn't like to, because he's so quick. He doesn't have to. So he takes the material that he has and he turns it into this magic. And I told him that, and he was happy to hear it, and so we decided to do this collaboration.
Well, it sounds like he really does bring his own special talent, his own unique poetry, his troubadour tradition that he has taken all around North America. I know you've worked with some other pretty big name artists like Ron Sexsmith, and audiences might remember your third symphony, 2008, with Sarah Slean singing.
Yeah.
What's unique about Scott's voice and the way he writes further to this particular kind of intimate showcase that is going to be taking place at what?
Very,
Western
very
Cultural
interesting
Center?
that you'd mention those collaborations, because I enjoyed those very much. The one with Ron Sexsmith was in Vancouver with the CBC Vancouver Orchestra, and their goal with that show was to feature our iconic songwriters.
Yeah.
And so my job was actually to set 4 Gordon Lightfoot songs with full orchestra when Ron Sexsmith, another major songwriter who really admired Gordon Lightfoot too, would perform them. And I was very pleased. I was a real Gordon Lightfoot fan when I was a kid. When I was 15, 16 years old, I had all the records. We played the songs myself, and so did Ron. And then the orchestra comes along, and I thought, this is perfect. This is like with classical music in Canada, we're sort of pretenders, because we didn't create this, not our music, except as we see ourselves as transplanted Europeans, which is true. You know, a lot of us are. But I'm 7 generations off of that, so it's not my really true home. It's a distant home for me. These songs are actually more of a home. Like my mom sang those Gordon Lightfoot songs while she was cooking in the kitchen. And that actually matters to me. It's very important. If you're an artist, you have to kind of know yourself. And that's why I admired Scott so much. I felt that he was, and actually I played him the arrangements that I made of these songs, and including the stuff that I did with Sarah. And then that's when the lights started to go on. I started listening to his music in a different way. Like when I did the Gordon Lightfoot songs, first thing I did is transcribe them. I sang them and played them myself, and then I started working on the orchestration and arrangement, so that it was my own art form. It wasn't just adding notes to this song. You know, it was actually morphing the song into a collaboration. And Scott and I get along very, very well. In some ways, we're the same musician, except we have this different kind of training, and we've got to deal with that. It's just this issue that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But we're always on the same page, and I love making music with him. Like sometimes when we're playing guitar together, it's just this thing, very, very magic thing that happens.
A true jam.
And the other thing about Scott's music is that it's, especially this new wave of music, which is set right here in Winnipeg. I actually tell him this. I'm not sure he believes me, but the music isn't about Winnipeg. It's actually about the deep soul of someone that lives here, and that's him. And a lot of people that work with Scott notice how it's a funny thing. You know, we start just talking to him, and then get together again, do a bit of jamming, do a bit of talking, do a bit of this and that, do an arrangement, do a bit of recording, and before you know it, like, he's the sort of guy. Just when he's around, things get created. Yeah. It's not always him that's creating it. It just happens. And so all of this history of our project, when I was thinking about it the other day before I was coming in here, I just thought, I don't know how that happened. It's just like, put that guy in a bunch of people when they're just all talking together and things get created.
He's just one of those people who ignites a spark.
Yeah.
Very much like you. I mean, you've been a real light for such a big part of the Manitoba music scene. And
that was the theme of the new music festival, and still is. The festival is still alive and going. And it's so really all about creative music making, and actually really trying to compel and getting an audience excited about what's actually going on in this music, which is really about themselves.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be that way. You know, I always believe that old music and new music are the same thing. My motto is that all music is new music, which is why I can go back into the blues or into early classical music and get something out of that and bring it into the present world. That's kind of what Scott and I both do, really.
Well, Glenn, I want to thank you so much for coming by the Classic 107 studio today. So for those of you listening, I've been chatting with Glenn Buhr. Manitoba Skylines, the world premiere that features Glenn Buhr, Scott Nolan with the Fallen Angels Orchestra, takes place on Thursday, December 5th. Doors open at 7:15. The show's at 8. A rather intimate show, right? Just 200 seats at the West End Cultural
There's
Center?
only about 200 seats, and you know, the design at the New Music Festival, where one of our team came up with the bright idea of putting the audience on stage on bleachers. I don't even know if they still do that, because I can't be in town during the festival because of my work. Although I can now, because I'm relocating to Manitoba, and I'm really looking forward to it. There's a lot of musicians here I love working with. And so what we did is the orchestra was on stage, and the audience was also on stage surrounding us. So at intermission, when the piece was over, they're just rubbing shoulders with the conductor and people and other people, and the audience in the orchestra. There was no division, which is really something I really truly believe in. We need each other. And so we're doing this at the West End Cultural Center with this small orchestra. We're bringing them down onto the floor, and with these singers in the middle, and in a little semicircle. Then the audience will surround them on the floor and move right up to the stage on risers. And then there's the mezzanine behind too. So there'll be this lovely sort of multidimensional circle of an intimate concert surrounding this music, which is actually it's chamber music. It's meant to be listened to where you're very, very close to the player, and so we're not amplifying. We're only putting a light amplification on the singers, so it's going to be like we're in your living room.
Oh, that is totally beautiful. And we've got a little treat for you here on Winnipeg's Classic 107. This is the on-air debut, I think, of Candy, the Scott Nolan song, arranged by you, Glenn, performed by the
broadcast premiere.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very thrilled. What can you tell us about this particular song?
Well, I mean, if Scott were here, he'd tell you the story of the song, which is kind of, like I say, he's a really good storyteller, and it really helps the show. But in my opinion, the music isn't really about the story. It's really about, it's actually Scott going through a spiritual transformation, and in order to do that, he's a very, very deeply loyal person. He's going back to his past. So this is about his first sort of erotic encounter with this beautiful young girl who is a year or two older than him, and that's sort of what it's about. But I actually think it's deeper than that.
Here it is, Candy.